In October 2024, we had the pleasure of interviewing Sophie Aldred, also known as the Seventh Doctor's explosive companion Ace. To sit down and chat with Sophie Aldred was nothing short of a dream come true for us at Luvarzi. Better still, we had a whole hour of her time to discuss her role as the Seventh Doctor's companion, although in truth we could have chatted to her for a lot longer. Our plan to cover every story from her time on the show proved to be somewhat ambitious and could have filled an entire Blu-ray. In short, there was a lot to discuss and so much to learn. We did, of course, ask Sophie Aldred how she got involved in Doctor Who in the first place. When she was cast the late 80s, the series had fallen out of favor. Sophie told us that Doctor Who wasn't exactly loved at the BBC, and the script editor Andrew Cartmel had told her that senior management didn't even bother to watch the tapes prior to transmission.
The BBC really weren't behind Doctor Who anymore. The executives, apparently, according to Andrew Cartmel, weren't even watching the TX tapes before they went out, which was great for him because he could get away with a lot of things that may not have gone through the net normally.
This was great for Doctor Who because it meant the production team could get away with things that might otherwise have been flagged. Sophie Aldred was, however, aware of the popularity and the enormity of the show she was joining, and had many vivid memories of Doctor Who's early days, particularly the Cybermen from Patrick Troughton's era with their sinister voices and letterbox mouths. But she did admit she was somewhat confused when she was cast as the Doctor Who companion, because in her mind the companions tended to run around quarries in unsuitable footwear, and she was very much a tomboy who rode a motorbike.
I was a bit confused because I thought, hang on a minute, Doctor Who companions, don't they scream and run around quarries in unsuitable footwear? So I couldn't quite understand why I'd been cast, because there I was, a sort of tomboy character.
Ironically, Sophie Aldred discovered that she was going to be the new Doctor Who companion whilst acting in a play with a man called John Scott Martin, who was one of the former Dalek operators. That being said, she had originally been cast in a one-off role for Dragonfire, and it was whilst this story was being filmed that the producer John Nathan Turner asked if she would like to become a regular. According to Sophie, this was all rather casual. Nathan Turner simply approached her whilst chomping on a cigarette and said, "Well, we're on if you are."
So after the first day's filming with Dragonfire, when John Nathan Turner kind of came and said to me, he said to me, it was funny, he lit up a cigarette, which of course you'd never do, in a very flamboyant way as he was. He said, "Right, darling," he said, "well, we're on if you're on." And I took that to, oh, okay, so brilliant. I must be taking over as the companion.
Naturally, our conversation then took a turn towards Remembrance of the Daleks, which was the first story of Doctor Who Season 25 and Sophie Aldred's first proper adventure in the TARDIS. There's a famous scene in Remembrance in which Sophie attacks a Dalek with a baseball bat, but there's a less well-known outtake in which she bludgeons the wrong Dalek. We asked Sophie about this, but she couldn't remember how the mistake came about. It certainly seems odd that the director would line up the shot, put a Dalek in situ with Ace poised with her baseball bat, and then not do anything. We may never know the truth about this one.
I wanted to ask, forgive me, because I believe, was there a take where you beat up the Dalek with the baseball bat when you weren't supposed to?
And nobody's ever said anything about it until then the Blu-ray, and then I think there's some outtake or something. I'll have to watch it, because as far as I was concerned, we set everything up, and there was the Dalek, and the guy was inside the Dalek because he had to move the eyepiece and the and obviously look like he was animated, the sink plunger and the egg whisk, and then they'd rigged a couple of explosions on those Dalek, on the bobble things on the Dalek skirt, and so I was shown which they were, so I had to hit those exactly.
However, outtakes notwithstanding, Remembrance of the Daleks is a very highly regarded story, and Sophie Aldred confessed that she knew it was a good one when she first read the script. This was even more remarkable. she explained, given that the writer Ben Aronovich was only 21 at the time. She added that he was very excited to be on set during production, which was unusual, but something that John Nathan Turner liked to encourage.
Were you aware that, oh, this is a good one? How the finished thing will be? Did you have a sense of that you were making something good when you were making Remembrance?
I think we did, yeah. I mean, it's gobsmacking now to think that Ben Aronovich was only 21 when he wrote Remembrance of the Daleks. It's extraordinary. And yet it's widely regarded as a classic in the whole of the canon of Doctor Who.
The discussion then turned towards the Happiness Patrol, the story which came after Remembrance. The interviewer, yours truly, revealed that it was one of his favourite stories of the Seventh Doctor's time, and Sophie Aldred was delighted to hear this. It sounded as if she really enjoyed the adventure too, particularly the subtle nods towards the Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, whom the guest star Sheila Hancock relished in parodying. Sadly, we didn't have time to ask Sophie Aldred about many of the other stories from her time on the show, but we did get chance to touch on Survival. This was an important adventure in Doctor Who's history, as it marked the end of the classic run, and indeed the end of Sophie Aldred's time on the show, as the program was cancelled shortly after transmission. That being said, Sophie Aldred did admit that she and the cast knew little of Doctor Who's impending doom, and she said this was down to John Nathan Turner's shielding it from the actors. Production on the final series, it seemed, was very much business as usual, with Ghost Light being the last adventure to go before the cameras.
Did you have any sense when you were making that season or Survival specifically, this could be the end or things might be winding down or this might be the last time you did it? Was there anything in the air or was it just business as usual? Can you remember what the vibe was?
Luckily for us, we had no clue. And John Nathan Turner was great that way because he knew that the BBC really weren't behind Doctor Who anymore. The executives, apparently, according to Andrew Cartmel, weren't even watching the TX tapes before they went out, which was great for him because he could get away with a lot of things that may not have gone through the net normally. Yeah, we were filming, I think, probably around July, and then we went back into studio in August for Ghostlight of 1989.
Of course, as you probably know, this wasn't Sophie Aldred's last appearance in Doctor Who. The character of Ace returned for the BBC's centenary special in 2022, The Power of the Doctor, which also marked the end of the Jodie Whittaker era. This was a dream come true for Sophie Aldred, who said that she cried when she received the call from the casting director Andy Pryor. She described it as the call that she didn't know she had been waiting for.
My agent rang, I thought she was going to say, oh, somebody's asked, for a signed autograph of blah, blah, blah. And she said, Andy Pryor, who's the casting director for Doctor Who, has just been talking to me about your availability. And you know what that means. And it was absolutely out of the blue. And I finished the call and I burst into tears.
This then led to a Zoom meeting with herself and the showrunner Chris Chibnall, who revealed that he had met her years before when he'd interviewed her at a Doctor Who convention in the 90s. And as excited as Sophie Aldred was to be returning to the series, she did admit to feeling a little deflated when she came off that initial Zoom call, as it sounded like she wouldn't have much to do in an episode which would also involve multiple companions, Daleks, Cybermen, and the Master to boot.
A Zoom was arranged with Chris Chibnall, and he said, would you do me the honour of being in Jodie Whittaker's final episode where she regenerates and it's the 100th anniversary? And I said, yeah, wild horses wouldn't stop me doing that, Chris. Anyway, we had the most lovely chat, and he said, look, I can't promise you much because in this episode, as well as Jodie's regeneration and it being the 100th anniversary of the BBC, we've got Daleks, Cybermen, the Master, and another companion.
But as it transpired, there was actually plenty of action for Ace in The Power of the Doctor, and indeed there are many great scenes in the story, not least the one where she is united with the Seventh Doctor, Sylvester McCoy. And while sadly there aren't any plans for an Ace spin-off series anytime soon, Sophie Aldred did reveal that she is currently working on a book which is due out next year. It will focus on all the badges pinned to Ace's iconic jacket, delving into the story behind each badge and why the character chose it. Exciting stuff.
And I'm actually working on a book at the moment, which is not a novel. It's a sort of companion piece almost with a book that I did years ago called Ace, the Inside Story of the End of an Era, which was a sort of scrapbook about my time on that with lots of photos. This one is about Ace's jacket, and it's probably going to come out spring, early summer next year.
As we said, we could have chatted to Sophie Aldred for hours, and it feels like we've only just scratched the surface of her Doctor Who anecdotes and stories. We certainly have a lot of follow-up questions regarding her proposal for an 8th Doctor and Ace spin-off series.
Sit, girl.